Listening to evil people. People talk a lot. They just talk. And if they're not born again, if they're not obeying in the scriptures, this is what happens. They're going to be talking wickedness. You listen to worldly music? Wickedness.
I don't want another pretty face. I don't want just anyone to hold. I don't want my love to go to waste. I want you and your beautiful soul.
Hello there everyone, I am Mr. Brass.
Well, hello there, Mr. Brass.
Now first off, let me define anti-theism. For this task, I'm going to use two atheist sources just so I don't get accused of using biased sources. According to J.D. Brucker in Reason Over Faith, Anti-Theism in the Case Against Religion, anti-theism is the active protest to religious organizations of all different faiths. And in the second defining of anti-theism, this is done by the atheist's most trusted source for information, Rational Wiki.
Rational Wiki.
Which they define anti-theism as the belief that theism and religion are harmful to society and people, and that even if theistic beliefs were true, they would be undesirable.
Why you would rely on Rational Wiki to provide a definition of anti-theism is beyond me. I know you can't see me right now, but there's definitely some hardcore head shaking happening behind the scenes. The second part of your definition is a bit off. Yes, I believe religions are harmful to society and individuals, but a big chunk of that belief relies on the fact that I think they're untrue. If I thought God existed, I'd no longer be an anti-theist. Take Christianity, for example. I think the hell doctrine is harmful to individuals and society, but if hell actually existed, then convincing people not to believe in it, which could possibly lead to their unending torture, would be an unethical action in my opinion. What would be undesirable would be the unending torture. Sure, you could argue both having to serve an almighty dictator and or going to hell are undesirable, but personally I'd still argue that being tortured for eternity would be the worse or the more undesirable outcome. Anyhow, I made a video addressing Cosmic Skeptic a while back in which I provided my definition of anti-theism. Here it is for future reference. Anti-theist, opposed to belief in the existence of a god or gods, or a person who is opposed to belief in the existence of a god or gods. Like I said earlier, if I used the definition of atheism that Alex uses in his video, I'd be an agnostic atheist, yet I'm against belief in the existence of a god because I don't think it's true. I'm not 100% sure there is no God, but I'm not 100% sure of anything, and that doesn't prevent me from taking a stance on other issues either. My type of anti-theism doesn't mean I want to see religious people locked up, I don't want religion outlawed, I don't want religious people oppressed, and I would protect their right to believe in something I think is silly. However, I do want less religion. I want less superstition, less doctrines of hell being taught, less religiously motivated beheadings, less theocracies, and so on and so forth. I want to accomplish that by using words and having conversations. I'm against God belief and religion because I think they're not true, and I believe we should be basing our ethics, our philosophies, and our societies on things that are true.
Now with that out of the way, I am going to go after an anti-theist argument. Anti-theists say that religion was a tool invented to control people. This is done as a way of showing the malevolent nature of religion. Here is George Carlin, aka a man atheists herald as their champion philosopher, even though he, funny enough, denied being an atheist. Here is his argument.
I tried finding evidence that George Carlin denied being an atheist, and the closest thing I could find was an interview his daughter did with Dave Rubin a few years back. Here's what she said.
Was he an atheist? Did he describe himself in any specific way related to God?
No, he did not use the term atheist. He felt atheism was as dogmatic as any other ism out there. Lately I've been introduced to what they call the humanist kind of community, which is something I relate to a lot more. I think he would have felt better about that. Sounds like they're not going to have as many meetings and armbands and things like that, which he used to talk about groups, because his thing
There's less Kool-Aid, I think.
Yeah, he felt any group of people, you get groupthink. And then where does the individual thinking, happen in that situation? So that always worried him. I think he named himself mostly as an agnostic.
So yeah, personally I don't know what the man believed, but I certainly don't consider him a great philosopher. He was a damn good comic, and he was wonderful at pointing out some of the absurdities found in religion, but to choose a George Carlin comedy routine as the anti-theist argument to debunk seems, well, comical.
About 5,000 years ago, a bunch of religious and political hustlers got together to try to figure out how to control people, how to keep them in line. They knew people were basically stupid and would believe anything they were told, so they announced that God had given them some commandments.
Now, I being the generous man I am, I have gone through the trouble of putting this argument from anti-theist in didactic form, from which it will be made to look like this. Premise 1. Things that were invented to control people are bad.
Not sure why you think that's a fair way of boiling down his major point. He's saying that hustlers came up with a way to control people by lying to them. I think most people would agree that being conned is a bad thing. I don't know anyone who would want to be lied to and hustled, but that certainly doesn't mean anti-theists would necessarily think that controlling people is a bad thing. I mean, that's basically why we have police, laws, a judicial system, etc. While some people might say these are bad things meant to control people, I doubt they're in the majority within anti-theist circles or society in general. Most people realize that we need laws and a way to enforce them. So your point is complete rubbish. Carry on.
Premise 2. Religion is a thing that was invented to control people. Conclusion, therefore religion is bad.
No, religion isn't true, and while some religions do more harm than others, basing decisions, societies, and lives around superstitious philosophies based on demonstrably false premises is harmful to some degree. What you can accomplish through religion can be accomplished without having to believe in superstitious nonsense. Since you told Caitlin Chloe that you're supposedly some sort of destroyer when it comes to anti-theism, you'd think that you would take the time to understand the most basic positions that anti-theists hold.
Now, I, as the democratically elected asshole and noted destroyer of anti-theist happy fun times...
And, I don't know, I'm having a lot of fun right now. Maybe you should start calling yourself the democratically elected creator of anti-theist fun times. If you keep making videos with really bad arguments like this one, well, let the good times roll, baby.
Now, with that out of the way, I think this is a stupid argument for the following reasons. 1. The first premise isn't true because one can simply ask, what does the negative origin of something have to do with its current benefits? Just because an idea has dark origins doesn't mean it can't be beneficial or be retooled into something good. For example, a lot of wedding traditions have dark origins. Bridesmaids were originally like bodyguards for brides, and the purpose of the best men was to prevent the bride from escaping, and a whole lot of more wedding traditions were simply ways to ward off spirits. Now, does the fact that there are wedding traditions with dark origins mean that wedding traditions in of themselves are bad? Obviously not, as the meaning behind these traditions have changed.
I certainly have no problem with people making use of ideas from religious philosophies that aren't reliant on woo. For example, I'm fine with meditation. It isn't based on superstition. The part of Buddhism I'd object to is anything that is based on superstition, such as karma or reincarnation. What I generally object to is the belief in superstitious nonsense. What I object to is the dogmatic idea that an almighty entity provided rules that can't be questioned, or that the magical horseshittery and horribly unethical stories found in some of these books are true and provide the best way to live our lives.
So a religious person could grant that religion has its origins in control, but it doesn't mean that it applies anymore, and it has benefits that overrule that. This is an extension to the first one, although to a slightly different degree. Now, while Rational Wiki's definition covers it, I will say it anyway because anti-theists overextend this argument into the validity of religion. If the argument becomes because religion was made this way as a way of controlling people, that therefore religion isn't true, that is to commit the genetic fallacy. It could be possible that because a religion is true, it had to control people, because not doing so would result in a bad outcome.
Anti-theists usually don't believe that religion is true, and even religious people would likely admit that religions, especially those based on a deity, try to control their behavior. I mean, are you asleep at the wheel, brass? Religious organizations and people spend a good amount of time and money trying to push their religiously fueled ideas into the political and social space. Most of them aren't even shy about telling you that they believe you should act a certain way or do certain things because their religion and God say so. But regardless, most anti-theists aren't usually arguing that because religions try to control behavior or did in the past that it's not true. They're arguing it's not true because there's little to no evidence for their religious position, and much of it is demonstrably false.
3. The anti-theist raising this likely isn't going to be consistent and apply this across the board. One can make the argument that schools and governments were invented for controlling people, but would anti-theists recommend that we dismiss governments and schools on the same ground as they do religion because of that? Clearly not.
Of course not, but if schools were teaching kids nonsense, I'd be advocating against them as well. For example, if teachers were telling students that gravity didn't exist, but that they were all being held down by invisible demons, and if they doubted it for even a second they deserved a strapping, I'd be against the school every bit as much as I'm against religions. I'd also be against certain forms of government, and I'd be fighting for the reform or abolishment of governments I thought were tyrannical, etc. I honestly don't know why you even brought up this embarrassing piece of whataboutery. Even if I granted you that your argument is sound here, which I absolutely do not, but let's say I do for the sake of argument. Whether or not anti-theists are consistent about their opposition to governments, schools, and religion, that wouldn't mean they're wrong to oppose religion. But I guess it makes sense to you since you're working off a complete caricature of what an anti-theist actually is. You're simply pretending that our main argument is that religions are meant to control, so bad, because a comedian said so in a stand-up routine.
4. The Hell Stipulation. The idea of hell is often used as evidence for control, but is fear of punishment always a bad thing? Isn't society guilty of this as well by having a prison system where you are threatened to be stripped of your rights if you don't obey a current law, which atheists typically agree is a subjective opinion of people? Are parents bad because they give rules with the intention of disciplining the child if not followed?
No, fear of punishment isn't always a bad thing. The prison and justice systems aren't based on eternal torture or superstitious bullshit either. We don't pretend that laws are laid down by some eternal being. If we think a law is unjust, we're able to change it. If new information becomes available that points toward our law being incorrect or unfair, etc., we are fully capable of discussing it and having it changed. This isn't the case with many religions. I also don't know many parents, well, besides the religious ones doing it on behalf of their supposedly super ethical religion, who are threatening kids with never-ending torture if they step out of line. If you did overhear a parent telling their 5-year-old that if they took their name in vain, for example, that they would take them home and beat them with a copper whip for several days, I'm fairly certain the vast majority of people would say that's unethical behavior.
Anti-theists also typically make the assumption that hell doesn't exist in order to add on the fact that it lies to children, but they don't back that claim up. If we made the assumption that hell exists, then it would be foolish not to warn people about it.
If you're making the claim that hell exists, then it's on you to provide evidence that it does. Otherwise, my invisible, lazy-eyed, god-eating pink dragon demands that you send me $100 a day for the next 20 years. What? You don't believe me? But you have no backing or evidence that it doesn't exist.
5. It really just overgeneralizes. One can reasonably believe that some religions were created to control people, but all religions? That is a harder stretch. Jesus himself was a first-century Jewish rabbi who preached a message that was controversial to authorities at the time and died for it. He hardly seemed to be the type of guy trying to control people.
Oh my. Jesus supposedly, according to the vast majority of Christians, told people that if they didn't believe, they couldn't enter heaven. Some Christians believe if you don't believe, it doesn't matter what you do in this life, you deserve hellfire. That's a very definition of control. Believe as I say, do what I say, or you will be burned for eternity. He also demanded that you love him more than you love the actual flesh and blood people in your life, including your family and friends.
Buddha was a prince who gave up materialistic desires to live a simple life and taught people as such. Hardly seems like the guy who was power hungry.
Again, Buddhism isn't based on a deity. It's more a philosophy that tries to teach you the best way to live your life.
6. The phrase which is taken as self-evident, aka religion was invented to control people, really just commits the bare assertion fallacy. Really there is no evidence given for the saying, and people who say it generally expect you to take it as true automatically without question.
Again, doesn't matter. This has nothing to do with anti-theists, and you're only addressing a made-up version of an argument that we'd actually make, which you've pulled out of a comedy routine.
7. Lastly, it presupposes an objective standard for morality without any justification. How can you honestly say it isn't morally wrong, it is or is not morally wrong for people to make things that control people? At best, you can say it is unpreferable to the society you currently live in, but you can't say in all earnestly that it is wrong.
Sure I can. Religions are wrong. They cause untold amounts of harm around the world every single day. They aren't true, and we need to get past believing in superstitious garbage as a species and start concentrating on the real world. That's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'm sorry I missed last week's upload. Work got the better of me, but I hope this one made up for it in some small way. Take care and cheers.
Whip a got style. Got style. Whip a got style.